Hey everyone, welcome. Today we've got a seriously incredible explainer for you. We're going to be looking directly at a primary source. It's a life memoir written way back in 1921 by an ordinary guy named Herman Schaffner. And what makes this document absolutely extraordinary is that his 70 years on Earth perfectly mirrored the birth, the destruction, and the ultimate rebuilding of early San Francisco. So we aren't just going to be reading off dates and facts today. No, we're actually stepping into the shoes of a man who literally watched a raw frontier outpost transform into a great American city and who left us a sort of roadmap on how to survive both personal tragedy and literal earth-shattering disaster. Let's get into it. Right from the very first pages of his memoir, Herman establishes this deeply personal tone. He actually lost his biological mother, Susanna, around the age of 3 while the family was living in New York. He admits in the text that he didn't even have enough memories of her to keep her face in his mind. Instead, as he wrote, his earliest recollections were not of a mother's arms, but of his father Friedrich's hands. Rough hands, a working man's hands. He vividly remembered those hands holding his own as they navigated the crowded, bustling streets of New York City. You know, it really sets the stage for a life built entirely on resilience.
So let's kick things off with Section 1, From New York to California. Okay, let's dive into this first major chapter of his life, leaving the East Coast behind. His father, Friedrich, like a lot of practical men of that generation, didn't mourn in isolation. He sought a partner to help raise his motherless boy, marrying an Irish woman named Martha Matilda. And together, they made a massive, life-altering decision. Herman was born in 1851, but by 1855, before the kid is even 5 years old, the family joins the multitude streaming west, arriving in a raw, post-gold rush San Francisco. By November of 1856, the family is naturalized. They officially planted their roots in American soil. And as Herman grew up, so did the city, and well, so did his family. Their house filled up with the noise and chaos of 5 new half-siblings, Matilda, Frederick, Louis, Charles, and little Nellie. Herman was the eldest, and you can really tell he felt both the heavy weight and the distinct privilege of that position.
Moving right along, let's look at Section 2, The Art of Bookbinding.
Let's see how this next phase really builds his character. We're going to jump to 1869. Herman is 18 years old. He's coming of age right at the exact moment the Transcontinental Railroad is completed, which was a huge deal because it finally tethered his previously isolated city to the wider world. And it's right here that Herman enters the printing trade. For him, bookbinding was all about taking loose pages, raw and unprotected, and giving them structure, permanence, a spine to stand upon. I mean, what an incredible metaphor for his life, right? As a young man in his 20s, dealing with the sudden death of his stepmother Martha in 1875, Herman was basically spending his days taking loose, chaotic parts and building a structured spine for them to stand upon.
And that brings us to what I truly believe is the philosophical core of this entire explainer. Herman realized his exacting work as a bookbinder wasn't just about applying glue and leather. He was building a defense against time itself. Time inflicts forgetting on all things, but if you preserve the information properly, it becomes a kind of permanence. This deep-seated desire to leave a lasting legacy, to build something that time just couldn't wash away, would soon push him out of the bindery and into the much wider world of civic duty.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, A Calling to Brotherhood.
So, in 1876, Herman's life took a really decisive turn when he married Mary Ann Paul. This was a woman he later referred to as his idolized wife. Together they had 3 sons, Paul, Herman Jr., and Frederick. With a growing family to support and this increasing itch for civic connection, Herman shifted his meticulous skills from bookbinding over to public service. Now, 35 years. I really want that massive number to sink in for a second. For 35 years, Herman Schaffner served as the Grand Keeper of Records and Seals for the Knights of Pythias domain of California. He basically took that exact same discipline, protecting loose pages from being forgotten, and applied it to the records and the history of thousands of his fraternal brothers.
And, well, in doing so, he earned some rather colorful titles. Get a load of this. He became the past Imperial Prince of the Dramatic Order of Knights of Khorasan. I absolutely love this because Herman himself actually admits in the text that he harbored a real flair for ceremony and pageant. Sure, it's a delightfully absurd, extravagant title, but it shows us that the little boy who grew up in the raw, dusty streets of a frontier town had found joy, community, and some theatrical fun in his adult life. He and Mary Ann had built a really solid, respectable home over on Castro Street. Life was predictable. It was structured.
But then came the morning of April 19, 1906. Section 4, the 1906 Great Earthquake. In an instant, everything Herman had so carefully structured met absolute chaos.
Just imagine waking up to this. Herman describes the massive sensory overload of that morning not like thunder, but as if the world was literally ending, a grinding, tearing roar from beneath the earth itself. The earth directly beneath San Francisco had violently snapped. His words here are just so visceral. He wrote, "The house bucked like a horse trying to throw its rider." Inside their Castro Street home, there was literally no time to think, only react, as the sheer, terrifying violence of the shaking threatened to rip apart the foundation of everything he had spent decades building.
The immediate physical destruction was just terrifying. Plaster falling from the walls all around them, chimneys cracking, windows completely shattering inward. Herman, Marianne, and their 3 grown boys had to scramble out of that bucking house and into the street. They're standing there in their nightclothes alongside all their terrified neighbors, just watching as smoke begins to rise ominously from the direction of downtown.
And walking down Market Street with his boys over the following days, they witnessed total, complete destruction. To put the scale of this into perspective, downtown, completely destroyed, Chinatown, reduced to ashes, the grand mansions up on Nob Hill left in ruins. Even the massive dome of City Hall had collapsed into rubble. It was just block after block of smoking ruins, with these brick chimneys standing around like lonely sentinels. They were incredibly fortunate, though. Their own home, being south of the fires, survived without any fire damage. They were able to fix the house, but they would live the rest of their entire lives remembering the day the earth literally tried to swallow their city.
And that brings us to our final chapter. Section 5, A Life Worth Living.
Surviving the earthquake was obviously a massive physical trial, but some profound emotional trials were still waiting for him. He had to figure out how to just keep putting one foot in front of the other while dealing with immense grief. Let's map out these later years. Just 2 years after the earthquake, in 1908, his idolized wife, Marianne, passed away. She was taken by an electric funeral car out to the stone city of Colma. The loss absolutely devastated him. He tried to recapture that companionship a few years later in 1912, marrying Mary Jane McWhitzer, but tragically, he lost her just 10 months later. He had to bury his second wife in the exact same year. Finally, in 1916, he found some comfort and companionship for his final years by marrying Frederica Hartmann. And then, in 1921, at the age of 70, Herman's own time came to a close.
As he sat down to write this memoir, at the very end of his life, his final reflections were incredibly grounding. He wrote of, quote, "the accumulated weight of years lived in service." You see, Herman realized his true legacy wasn't in those grand, absurd titles like Imperial Prince, or even just the records he kept. His real legacy was the weight of his duty. It was the fact that his son Paul was out there managing a Valvoline company, his son Fred was a teller at the Humboldt Savings Bank, and Herman Jr. was making his own way as a stenographer. His legacy was his granddaughter Muriel, who was a bright light for him in some really difficult years. San Francisco had taken in a motherless little boy from New York and given him a life truly worth living.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final thought today. Herman Schaffner spent his early life literally giving structure and permanence to loose pages, and he spent his later life giving that exact same structure to his family and to his city, even when the earth itself tried to tear it all down. So I ask you to apply this to your own life. When your earth shakes, what will remain of the structure you built? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep building your legacy, and I'll see you next time.